Welcome, everyone, to vpod.ai. Today, we're looking at a really specific part of the U.S. immigration system. It's a temporary worker program, the one that lets employers bring in foreign nationals for what they call specialty occupations. Now, this topic gets pretty heated politically often, but, we're going to try and stick to the facts today. Look at the rules, the history, and especially the economic effects during that big tech boom.
Right, and we're talking about the H-1B status, generally. If you're trying to get your head around this, the main thing is it's not just any job needing a degree. It's specifically for a specialty occupation.
Okay, and what does that actually mean, specialty occupation?
Well, the definition is pretty precise. It has to be a job that requires applying highly specialized knowledge, both theoretical and practical knowledge. And crucially, the minimum requirement for the person doing the job is a bachelor's degree, or even higher, or its equivalent in that exact specialty. So it's a high bar.
A very focused bar, yeah. And that focus is really key, isn't it? Because we're going to see how this program, even with those strict rules, kind of reshaped the tech world in the U.S., particularly, between 94 and 2001, big growth years. But maybe let's start with the paperwork, the process itself, because that's where a lot of the rules and maybe the controversies actually start.
Absolutely, and it's all driven by the employer. They're the ones who have to petition the government, specifically U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. But even before that, they need a green light from the Department of Labor, the DOL.
Oh, interesting. Why the DOL? I mean, for a temporary visa, isn't that a bit unusual?
It's actually a really critical step here. The DOL requires something called a labor condition application, or LCA. And in that LCA, the employer has to promise, essentially attest, to paying the foreign worker fairly.
Fairly, meaning
Meaning at least the local prevailing wage for that job, or what the company pays its other workers in similar roles, whichever one is higher. The whole point really is to make sure the program isn't used to just, drive down wages for local workers.
Okay, so on the surface, that sounds like a solid protection. The rules seem clear.
They are very strict on paper. The salary has to be stated as a yearly full-time amount. And this is important. It cannot include things like health insurance, bonuses, stock options, any of that non-cash stuff. So say someone's paid $6,500 a month. The LCA must show $78,000 a year. Even if they get amazing benefits on top, those are invisible for this wage calculation.
Right. That distinction, cash only, no benefits counted. That feels like something we should remember when we talk about the criticisms later. Okay, what about the worker's timeline? It's temporary non-immigrant. How long can they stay?
So initially it's granted for up to 3 years, then it can be extended, but generally only up to a maximum of 6 years total spent physically in the U.S. That 6-year clock is usually a hard stop, unless the employer has started the green card process for them.
Ah, okay. So there's a way around the 6-year limit. What's the trigger for that? How do they keep extending?
Basically, once the government officially recognizes the worker is on the path to permanent residency, meaning they have an approved immigrant petition, an I-140, then they can keep getting temporary extensions beyond 6 years. They can keep renewing until their actual green card number becomes available, which can take a very, very long time depending on the person's country of origin. This waiting period is, a key vulnerability.
We'll definitely circle back to that vulnerability. And quickly, what about families? The spouse, kids?
Right. The spouse and any unmarried kids under 21 can usually get H-4 status to accompany the main worker. And something important for families listening, some H-4 spouses can happily get work authorization themselves, but usually only if the main H-1B holder has already crossed that major hurdle in the green card process. That approved I-140. It gives the family some breathing room financially during that long wait.
Okay, that makes sense. So that whole system hinges on getting one of those initial H-1B spots. Which brings us to the caps, the numerical limits. Seems like the debate always comes back to these numbers.
It really does, because historically, demand has massively outstripped supply. The standard annual cap for new H-1Bs is $65,000. That's the regular cap. Then there's an extra $20,000 set aside for people who got a master's degree or PhD from a U.S. university.
So 85,000 new people per year, roughly. But extensions for people already here don't count against that cap, right? And some employers are totally exempt.
That's correct. Renewals aren't capped. And universities, plus some affiliated nonprofit research places, they don't face the cap at all. It's sort of an acknowledgement of their role in research and education.
Now, the history here is where it gets wild. That 65,000 number was set way back in 1990. But then the dot-com boom hit.
Oh, yeah. It completely changed the game for tech labor. The demand from companies just exploded. So Congress actually acted pretty quickly, relatively speaking. They raised the cap first to 115,000 for 99 and 2000, and then it went way up to 195,000 per year for fiscal years 2001, 2002, 2003.
Wow, 195,000. That's almost triple the original cap in just about a decade. That huge increase must have meant a massive number of these workers were in the U.S. by the early 2000s.
Exactly. Estimates put the total H-1B population at around 500,000 people by 2001. And this flood of workers really changed who was getting these visas. Back in 1989, computer jobs were like only 11% of the total. Small slice. But by 1999, computer-related jobs made up almost two-thirds of all H-1Bs. It basically became the main pipeline for tech talent during that boom.
That's an incredible shift. Just completely dominates the program. Before we get into the economic fallout, there's one more feature we should mention, something called portability. What's that about?
Portability is really important for the workers themselves. It basically means if you're on an H-1B and you want to change jobs, you can actually start working for the new employer as soon as they've filed the petition for you.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait months and months for the final approval to come through.
That sounds like a huge plus. Prevents people getting stuck, right?
Yeah. It does offer flexibility, definitely.
Yeah.
But there's a catch. If that new petition eventually gets denied, maybe months down the line, your permission to work based on that portability just stops immediately. So it can create a really precarious situation if the new application hits a snag.
Oof, yeah, a sudden cliff edge. Okay, let's switch gears to the economics. You mentioned this study, this model that looked at that key period, 94 to 2001. They compared what actually happened to the open economy with all the H-1Bs flooding into a what-if scenario, a closed economy where foreign worker numbers stayed at 1994 levels. What did this tell us? Who won, who lost?
Well, the findings were pretty stark regarding the impact on U.S.-born workers in the same field. Looking specifically at U.S. computer scientists, the model estimated their numbers were actually lower in the real world, the open economy, by 2001, somewhere between 6.1% and 10.8% lower than they would have been without the H-1B influx.
Okay, so that's quantifiable crowding out. The data suggests what? For every 100 foreign computer scientists who came in, maybe 30 to 60 U.S. computer scientists ended up not working in CS, pushed into other fields?
That's the interpretation, yes. They likely moved into other college graduate-level jobs, but outside of computer science. And related to that, there was a wage effect, too. For those U.S. computer scientists who remained in the field, their wages were estimated to be about 2.6% to 5.1% lower by 2001 than they would have been otherwise. More supply, lower price, essentially. And this is where it gets complicated. It wasn't bad news for everyone's wages.
Right, you mentioned that earlier. Who actually saw a benefit in terms of pay?
Workers without college degrees, their wages actually went up slightly, estimated between 0.43% and 0.52%. The thinking there, the economic theory, is that high-skilled workers coming in aren't necessarily competing with non-college workers. They're often complements. They might create new processes, new management needs, drive investment that ultimately makes non-college labor more productive, and thus higher paid.
That's really interesting, kind of counterintuitive. So displacement and lower wages for highly skilled U.S. workers in the same field, but a small boost for workers without degrees. What about the wider economy? All that innovation must have had bigger benefits, right? Lower prices?
Oh, absolutely. The model showed that the bigger pool of computer science talent fueled innovation.
Yeah.
That led to lower prices for IT goods and services. The overall output of IT goods in the U.S. was estimated to be 1.9% to 2.5% higher because of the H-1B influx.
Yeah.
So consumers definitely benefited. And unsurprisingly, companies in the IT sector did very well. Their profits were substantially higher. Overall profit increase for existing firms was around 0.62% by 2001.
Okay, so the picture is U.S. computer scientists lose out on jobs and wages, but consumers get cheaper tech, non-college workers get a slight wage bump, and IT companies make more money. This leads us right into the criticisms, then. The argument that the whole program is flawed or even abused. Let's start with the big one, cheap labor.
Yeah, the core criticism is that companies aren't just using it to find skills they genuinely can't find locally, but also, sometimes primarily, to hire workers at a lower cost than their American counterparts. And there's data that seems to back this up, at least partially. One analysis found that about 60% of the H-1B jobs certified were actually being paid below the local median wage for that occupation. Like for an entry-level software developer in D.C., a level 1 position, the estimated discount compared to the median was maybe around 36%. That's significant.
36%. Wow, that really feeds the argument that it's not about skill scarcity, it's about cost savings.
And another data point that gets cited is the difference between temporary workers and those who get green cards. Studies suggest that once a worker gets permanent residency, their earnings jump up quite a bit, maybe 25% more than similar temporary workers. The idea being that once they're free to change jobs easily, their true market value is revealed.
Which implies they were underpaid while tied to the temporary visa. And some academics even challenge the whole premise, right? This idea that there's a huge STEM shortage in the first place.
Correct. There's research arguing the STEM shortage is exaggerated, maybe even imaginary. They point to things like stagnant or even declining real wages for engineers over long periods, which, basic economics suggests shouldn't happen if there's a genuine, persistent shortage of workers.
Yeah.
Demand should drive wages up.
And then there's the outsourcing angle, the claim that it's not even about filling jobs here long term, but more like training competitors.
That's another major critique. The argument is that some companies, particularly large IT service firms, bring engineers over on H-1Bs for relatively short stints. The main goal isn't necessarily project work here, but rather for those engineers to learn the client's business, internal systems, proprietary tools, and then take that knowledge back home, effectively using the program to train their own lower-cost workforce overseas who can then compete against U.S. firms and workers.
Okay, so we have wage concerns, questions about the actual need, the outsourcing issue, and on top of all that, there are problems with outright fraud, aren't there? Especially with the lottery system now.
Yeah, compliance and fraud have been persistent issues. Way back in 2008, a government assessment found issues fraud or technical violations in about 21% of the petitions they reviewed. And the rate was even higher for computer jobs, around 27%. More recently, the big concern is gaming the electronic registration system, the lottery.
How does that work?
Well, because there are way more applicants than spots, some employers or groups of employers allegedly file multiple registrations for the same person, sometimes for jobs that might not even be real. It's just about maximizing the chance of getting selected in the lottery.
Is that why the numbers seemed so crazy high in the last lottery?
That's certainly the suspicion. For the fiscal year 2024 lottery, there were almost 760,000 eligible registrations filed, but they only selected about 110,000. That huge gap suggests a lot of those registrations might have been duplicates or perhaps not tied to legitimate, immediate job openings. It really strains the system.
And finally, there's this whole issue with the green card process itself, the PRM process, right? Critics say it makes workers incredibly vulnerable.
Right. PRM is the labor certification step for the green card, and it's often described somewhat cynically as the ghost job search. Legally, the employer has to advertise the job and pretend to look for a qualified U.S. worker. Even though the job is already filled by the foreign worker, they want to sponsor for a green card.
So it's basically just going through the motions, pure paperwork.
That's the strong criticism, yes,
Ah.
that it's theater. And the effect is that it creates this enormous backlog, especially for workers from certain countries with high demand. These workers can end up waiting years, sometimes over a decade, for their green card number. And during that time, they're heavily tied to the sponsoring employer. Changing jobs is difficult and risky. Critics call it a form of indentured servitude. One lawmaker involved in the original legislation famously said he believed no American has ever gotten a job through that specific PRM advertising step, highlighting how performative it seems.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, the data, the history, the critiques, what's the overall picture? It sounds incredibly complex.
It really is two-sided. On one hand, the economic analysis strongly suggests the program, especially during that high growth phase, did boost the overall economy. More innovation, lower IT prices, higher profits for firms, benefits for consumers, those are real gains. But on the other hand, that growth clearly came with a cost, and that cost was very concentrated on a specific group. U.S.-born workers in those high-skilled fields who face direct competition leading to fewer jobs and lower wages for them. It's a classic case of diffuse benefits versus concentrated costs.
That really frames the dilemma perfectly, which leads us to the final thought for you listening out there. If the economic models are basically right, that the broad benefits to consumers like you and to companies from having more high-skilled immigrants come at the direct expense of some American workers in those same fields, well, the policy question becomes really sharp. Is that trade-off worth it? Are you, as a consumer, enjoying potentially slightly lower prices, okay with the fact that it might displace a specific group of skilled workers here? Where should the government strike that balance between overall economic growth and protecting specific segments of the domestic workforce? Something to think about.